everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Guys Who Stare at Stats. Cade Kennedy with you, alongside Tyler Riggs. And yes, this channel is in fact alive. I know it's been 4 months since we did a video. Back in December, I said we'll get to you, maybe in a few weeks we'll do another video. I was right about the few weeks part. If we would have times that by about 5, 6, 7,
weeks,
technically correct, the best kind of correct, but here we are in March. I do apologize for that, but it is March Madness. It is one of the best times of the year. Of course, it brought Tyler back last year, if you remembered, a guy who said, I think this Florida Atlantic team is a little bit special, and then what do you know, they went to the Final Four. So
Let's
Tyler
go.
got that one back.
We'll ignore all my misses from the last tournament as well completely because we don't admit mistakes.
There you go. I mean, hey, sometimes that's the way you do it, though. You just got to go with what you got. Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. That's the nature of the beast. But we're going to start with the East part of the bracket here, the 4-video series we'll do, kind of like if you remember last year what we did. Start with the East, work our way down to the West, South, Midwest, all 4 of the brackets, of course. That'd be kind of weird to do 3 of the 4, wouldn't it? I mean, that'd be one of those, like, what are we doing here? Don't want to be that guy. We're off to a great start.
We are.
But either way, starting with the first game in the East, the 1-16 matchup, UConn taking on Stetson. UConn a 26.5-point favorite in this one. Stetson, if you watch the A-Sun tournament, I mean, they're a fun team. They've got one of the best scorers in college basketball. But on the other side, you're playing the defending champions in Connecticut.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Jalen Blackman, the fun guy for Stetson, 21.5 points per game. Great player, but you're facing a beast in UConn that is somehow better than last year's team. They've really done it with the different cast. So the question of this game is not, is UConn going to win? It comes down to, are they covering? That's the real only debate in this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's simple. The real question is, does Connecticut cover? Do the Huskies win by 26? Do they win by 27? That might be one of those fun scenarios we get into, but either way, I think it's easy to put UConn moving on to the second round. But the next one, I think, is when we're going to start to see a little bit of the divide. The way we're going to keep things for the bracket, we'll just go with my picks here. Tyler will definitely differ. We've already discussed some of that. It'll be a lot of fun to see. This might be one of those dividing games already, the 8-9, Florida Atlantic playing Northwestern. We talked about it a little bit before we got started. Joked about who's going to be the FAU of this year. Could it be FAU again? They're 2.5-point favorites over Northwestern.
So the difference with last year's FAU team to this year's team, even though they brought back pretty much almost all the same cast, I wouldn't say the hype has got to the guys, but I think some of that pressure has leaked in. Defensively, they're not as stout, not as physical as what they were last year for whatever reason. Part of that is they switched conferences, went to the Atlantic, or not the Atlantic,
The American.
American. Thank you, geez. So maybe there's some of that. I'm not quite sure what has gone wrong with the Mystique. They don't feel like that same team last year. So that being said, though, this Northwestern team, while fun, a little banged up coming into the tournament. If they were healthy, I'd give them a better chance. But just because of that, and especially in these 8-9 matchups, these teams are usually pretty even. I'm taking FAU just in the first round. I'm not trying to jump on the bandwagon from last year and ride that again, but just they'll get past Northwestern. Let me put it that way.
To me, this is a battle of two teams that, fun term I always like to say, consistently inconsistent.
Yeah.
Northwestern, I mean, you look at them, 11 losses on the year. They've had, of course, the notable moment of going toe-to-toe, getting the win over Purdue, and then you play Chicago State, you lose to Chicago State, and everyone's wondering what in the world are you doing. If you're Florida Atlantic, you have some amazing wins. I mean, you've battled with Arizona and Illinois. Then you turn around and lose games that, Stetson was one of those. You play, some of those teams. Temple, of course.
Yeah.
You just battled with them in an AAC semifinal. Everyone's going, this is a Temple team that, dealt with the point-shaving scandal going on.
In FAU's defense, Temple had to beat the allegations, all right? So what a better way to do that than to go to the conference tournament final?
But it was one of those where FAU just so many times this year, when they're at their high, they look like a top 10 team. But, man, when they're at that low point, like we saw against Temple, they can lose to just about anybody. Northwestern, same way. But I think they have slightly more consistency. They haven't had anything really as bad since that Chicago State game. They've had some hiccups here and there losing to teams like Minnesota and stuff. But at the end of the day, I trust Boo Buie just a little bit more than this
Ooh,
FAU team.
wow.
Give me Northwestern in the upset over FAU.
And, Cade, I think the saying goes on these consistently inconsistent teams can play with the best of them, but can hang with the worst of them. I think that's probably, how a lot of these teams profile. We'll see that throughout. This year might be kind of a crazy chaos year for sure. When you go, beyond those 1 to 2 seeds, you get into the 3-on plus. It could be a wild year.
It will be. And, we talk about wild, the 5-12 matchup, something that you always look at as the great upset picker, basically. Some would argue that 11 over 6 is the new trendy upset pick now.
And even to a degree, maybe the 13 over the 4, right? That's kind of been a popular one.
It has. And then San Diego State playing UAB. The Blazers had that big run in the AAC. We just talked about the American tournament. UAB, I had a lot of fun watching them over the past few days. They are a physical team. They absolutely have the strength to compete with people. But at the same time, San Diego State, another experienced, talented squad.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to disregard UAB when I say this, but this UAB team reminds me of last year's Fairleigh Dickinson team, where you want to talk about just tough, gritty, nothing flashy, nothing over the top, but they're going to find a way to try to compete. Doesn't always result in wins. I think the problem for UAB is San Diego State, although not quite as sharp as they were last year, still have the core components of great defensive team, good enough offensively for the most part, and they're going to wear you down physically. I mean, if this gets into a physical contest, which is profiling that way, San Diego State wins the rock fight, if you will. UAB, I think, just can't quite keep up in the end. No 12-5 for me over this one. Give me San Diego State.
And that's where I'm at. I think San Diego State's just a bit too tough of a team. And UAB, a great run, but unfortunately, it's one of those someone has to lose.
They get a different draw. Maybe they can pull off the upset, but it's not happening.
And that will move us to the 4-13 game. Auburn taking on Yale. Yale, of course, the buzzer beater to win the Ivy League tournament. I mean, that was a back-and-forth game. If you watched that Sunday afternoon, I mean, that was one where I don't really think Brown, I don't think anyone had 13-win Brown giving Yale that much of a game, but credit to the Bulldogs, they came back, put up a good fight, and they get rewarded with one of the worst draws of red-hot Auburn right now.
Oh, man. And so just to throw the stat out there early, and I'll probably repeat it as we go down the line, a little bit of, if you subscribe to Kim Palm, obviously, Advanced Analytics, 22 of the last 24 national champions had a top 18 offense, according to Kim Palm. The only exceptions there, 2011 and 2014 UConn. And then 23 of the last 24 national champions had a top 37 defense under the Kim Palm rankings. The only outlier there, and you could argue possibly because of what was going on, 2021 Baylor, which COVID, they were one of those teams that had players sit out a significant chunk for a bit. And so that means of these teams, there's just 7 that fit into that category, if you will. UConn, Houston, Purdue, Arizona, Creighton, and in the 4 seeds, Duke and Auburn. Auburn is the only team this year, Cade, that ranks in the top 10 in both offense and defense. I like the Eagles. I'm talking myself into them. But I don't know what it is about this Auburn team. They're deep. They're super deep. They're legit 10 deep. I hate to pick them because of who's coaching them. I'm not a fan. But
And you're not a big Bruce Pearl guy.
Not a big Bruce Pearl fan. But, give me Auburn to roll significantly.
Well, I think it'll be a good day. The Tigers going to do what they do. This is an Auburn team. I mean, talking about Bruce Pearl, I mean, the fact that he has built this program up, what he's done at Auburn, basically from scratch, turning them into an opportunity where you look at them as a 4 seed and you can think, okay, if they can get going a little bit, you're going to have some tough draws down the road. I think we're both in agreement. They'll at least get the win over Yale, but Auburn, they're going to come up again in this video a lot because they're a team that I think a lot of people have as that dark horse. If someone could get past UConn, it might just be Auburn. But we'll have to see. Of course, going to the bottom part, BYU taking on Duquesne. And I don't have Andrew here, so I can't mess with him and call it Duquesne this week.
Oh, no, don't call it Duquesne.
I know, but Duquesne, I mean, they deserve to have some respect. What the Dukes have been doing in the A-10 this year, a wonderful story for them. Haven't been in the tournament in so long since the 70s. They're finally back. But they get a BYU team that another one of those, they shoot a lot of threes. You know what BYU can do, and you're going to find out usually in the first 2 or 3 minutes of a game. If they're falling, it's not your day. If BYU's having a little bit of trouble, though, Duquesne's a good enough team to try to hang around.
Yeah, and so when you talk about the 11-6s, this is the first one where you look at it and you say, okay, there's something here for Duquesne. They're actually a legitimately good defensive team. Offense, a little bit more middling, but you're going to see that a lot when you get to at least the 10 seed on, right, in terms of seed lines. But they've had kind of a star emerge a little bit. Jimmy Clark III, during their 8-game winning streak, 17 points a game. So when you do have that offensive punch, somebody to kind of lead things, and you back that with good defense, we see with Tennessee kind of the same model, right, where you get that star player out in front, you back it up with good defense. That's tough to beat in defense in the tournament. I mean, if you didn't watch last year, that's what travels. Offense can to a degree. Obviously, you go back to the great run of Kimball Walker, right? That was all him right there. But generally, elite defense carries. But for BYU, if they even come out and kind of push that pace, I think that's where Duquesne runs into a little bit of problem. I think BYU, even if they're not following Cade, will make enough to get over the top in this one. It may be a closer game than some think, but I'm still taking the Cougs at the end of the day.
And that's where I'm at. I think BYU, even if they have a rougher shooting day, I still think if they want to go inside, get into the paint a little bit, they're good enough to beat Duquesne. Some people are kind of questioning, why Duquesne is an 11 seed, maybe put them as a 12 or a 13, kind of an interesting spot to put them in, but just an unfortunate draw for the Dukes.
It is, and I think they fell victim to the analytics of being that elite defense, or that elite defense for their conference, if you will. Really kind of put them in the spot where the committee looks at them and says, okay, maybe they're a little bit better in some of these 12, 13 seeds, where they slip back a little bit in the seeding. Maybe they get somebody like Kansas who's short-handed, and all of a sudden, okay, now you've got a real fun recipe for a Duquesne team that can make a run. But BYU, I think when it matters, will come alive a little bit.
And that will bring us to the 3 versus 14. Illinois taking on Morehead State. Illinois, an 11.5-point favorite. But this is going to be a fun one. I mean, Terrence Shannon Jr. averaging 23 points a game for the Illini. And then Riley Minix, one of those players, we don't really talk about a whole lot, but now that's tournament time, he has the opportunity to be the guy for Morehead State.
Yeah, and was a 2,000-point scorer at Southeastern University, NAIA school. Legit talent. Remember, folks, NAIA counts as legit college sports. I promise you there are some dogs down there. People don't realize it. The only problem for Morehead State in this is that, and it's been this way, they've had time to adjust because it happened so early, but Mark Freeman, the guy that was the reigning conference player of the year for them and everything like that, he goes down after the season. You would need a guy like that in this scenario if you're going to pull off the upset, because Illinois doesn't have great enough defense to really, if you get hot, they can't stop you. But at the end of the day, they've got enough firepower themselves. Even if this goes to a shootout, give me the fight in the line. I'll take them at least for the first round.
And that's where I'm at. I think Illinois, they've proven what they need to do. I mean, if you watch their Big Ten tournament run, I'm a firm believer of getting hot at the right time. A lot of people say, these conference tournaments don't mean a whole lot. I think they're a great confidence booster.
Oh, yeah.
They're a great, kind of momentum factor, so to speak. We'll talk about that a lot, obviously, as we go along in the tournament. But BYU and Illinois were both in agreement they'll meet each other in the second round. And that brings us to the one that we've had a lot of fun discussing before the show, Washington State and Drake, the 7-10 matchup. And the line on this has moved quite a bit. It was Drake 1.5, then it started to move
around. It still
around.
is. I checked. It is still sitting there. I thought it moved a little bit more, but not the case. Drake, the slight favorite over Washington State, over Wazoo.
And, I mean, this is one, for me, when you're able to play an hour and a half away from home as a 10 seed, that's got to be a little bit of a factor here. Drake, of course, in Des Moines, Iowa, playing over in Omaha against Washington State. Wazoo's a good team. They are a physical team. They are a tough team. There's a reason why they were top 25 for the first time in 16 years. But something about Tucker DeVries, the way he played last year, did not have a great showing against Miami at all. I think he wants revenge for that. He's one of the best scorers in the NCAA as a whole. I think Drake puts up enough of a fight, hangs around long enough, they get that momentum boost. Keep in mind, Iowa State will be there as well. Iowa State, they're going to support another Iowa team. They're not really rivals. They don't really play each other enough to be classified as that. Some Iowa State fans might have a different opinion on that, but I think Drake gets that late momentum swing in their favor. And the Bulldogs keep on keeping on.
This is where we differ because as much as Tucker is a great player, like you mentioned, and he is, something happened with this Washington State team down the stretch, okay? They inserted Jalen Wells into the starting lineup. Explosive, 6'8" forward. At the time, or he's hitting 42% of his threes, Cade, almost 43%, averaging double digits. And the more important part of that is that when they did insert him into the lineup, down the stretch, 13-3 for this Washington State team. They improved massively on the defensive end as well. They rose to the top 25 in the country defensively. And while their offense is, by the metrics, a little bit behind Drake, it's not a huge difference. And Washington State's the much better defensive team. We just talked about defense traveling. People say the Pac-12 was worse this year. It was a little, underwhelming. I think it's a little bit more competitive than people get credit for. Give me Wazoo, baby, over Drake.
And see, you talk about the strength of the Pac-12, something I always talk about, conference I've liked following since I was a little kid, the strength of the Missouri Valley. We don't talk about that often. I mean, a Bradley team that you're not really going to hear about, they were in the NIT this year. Indiana State, of course, is the big name that a lot of people wanted to see the Sycamores in. They didn't make it there, unfortunately, for them. I mean, when you look at what Virginia did yesterday, I think it would have been more fun to see Indiana State personally, but at the same time, I think Drake, with what they've been able to do, getting those 2 wins they have over Indiana State, sweeping Bradley, they've shown that they've got that pedigree. They have the prestige. They have a coach that knows how to win. They have everything there. They don't have the greatest draw in the world, and I'm not surprised, you picked Washington State. This is one of those tough 7-10 games.
Absolutely.
I just like Drake a little bit more.
And that's fair. I just think that, people – the one thing we do in the modern day, and don't get me wrong, you're absolutely correct, great conference that Drake is in, underrated conference, right, for mid-major. But there is still that difference, I think, especially in the physical side of it when you get to these power conferences. And the Pac-12, has had some teams that I think do play pretty well physical, and Washington State's become one of them. So we see it with the Big 12 a lot. Obviously, we're more prone to that Big 12 where really the physicality of the league a lot of times is what separates these teams. We see Iowa State in the past when they're not the best teams go on runs simply because they're more physical, right? And I think Washington State just falls into that category for this year.
And speaking of Iowa State, you just talked about them. They play South Dakota State. And Iowa State fans, they already felt pretty good about this team. And then you go and beat up Houston, which is unbelievable. Unheard of that a team can out-physically Houston in the way they did and beat them by 25 points in the Big 12 championship game. Iowa State now sitting as a 2 seed. They believe they can go on a big-time run, and it starts if they can get a win over the Jackrabbits, which I think they can. Iowa State, 16.5-point favorites in this one.
Yeah, and again, this will probably be a question of do you cover the spread. That being said, South Dakota State guy give mention to Zeke Mayo. He was a guy that could have transferred, elected not to. He averages almost 19 points a game, 6 boards, just under 4 assists. Really good guard, fun to watch, but he's not going to have enough around him. This Iowa State team, we talk about physicality. Oh, my goodness. That's what they made their reputation on pretty much as a program, it seems like, over the last decade. And that's only continued, and they've continued to I call them the Kansas State of college basketball. And since we see Kansas State a lot develop these underrated talents in football, and they just become, players. Maybe not always guys that you'd picture to go to the NFL or be the top of the athletic charts, but they could play. And Iowa State's in that vein now, and they're so balanced offensively. There's a lot of guys that contribute a lot of hands in the pot, which can make them tough to defend. And like I said, they work together as a unit defensively and will just beat you down. We saw it, with the Houston Big 12 championship game, and that was just impressive. It really was. And the only big concern I'll have with Iowa State as we go along is do they have that player that can take over? Because, as we know, when you get to the NCAA tournament, star power still matters. Do you have that guy? That's something we'll have to discuss a little later with this Iowa State team.
But as for now, I think we could both easily agree Iowa State moving on in the 2-15 matchup. So now we move to the second round here, and obviously we'll start to have a little bit of differing in picks, but UConn taking on Northwestern in my side, Florida Atlantic in yours. I think we can both agree, though, that UConn will be moving on.
Yeah, they're just too stout for either one of those squads. We talked about the inconsistencies with FAU, talked about Northwestern possibly not at full strength and their inconsistencies on top of that. And UConn's just a machine. I don't think they'll fall to a bad team. I think they're almost upset proof. That being said, once you get past this into the Sweet 16, I think this region as a whole in the East Side, once you boil it down to the last 4 teams in the region, if you will, it's tough. I mean, this might be the toughest one to get out of if you're one of those, top teams like UConn.
Absolutely. And then that brings us to the 4-5, which you're talking about a San Diego State team that, once again, was in the Final Four last year versus an Auburn team that has continued to just win and win and win. I think Auburn wins here, but it's going to be a tougher game than I think most people expect. San Diego State, still not an easy out by any stretch of the imagination, but I still like Auburn to get it done.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question San Diego State's going to make Auburn earn their win here, but I think this is where Auburn also really flexes that depth, right? Because you're going to have moments in this game where San Diego State has you beaten down a bit physically, but Auburn's got 10 legitimate guys, and they're going to be tough to wear out. I think that's going to be the prevailing theme for them, is just the fact that they've got that type of rotation. You don't see that often in college basketball, and, say what you will about Bruce Pearl as a person, the dude could coach, and he's got this squad kind of on another level, it seems like.
And then that will bring us to the 6-3, which is interesting here, Illinois and BYU. If you look at some of the metrics, the analytics, I know when I was looking at it earlier, some of the places saying, hey, BYU is the smart pick here over Illinois with what they can bring to the table with the offense. I'm not buying it, though. I think something could be said, though. Yes, Illinois doesn't have the greatest defense in the world, but I think something could be said about what they bring to the table, what Coach Underwood brings to the table, and that experience you have. BYU, if the threes stop falling, things are going to get a little dicey for them. Illinois has that ability, that they have that star player to run through in Terrence Shannon Jr. I think Illinois holds on for dear life in a close one.
And this is where I bust out the stat. I saved this on purpose because I knew we would get to this. There's a reason why people are saying BYU is the smart choice, because they get profiled as this high-flying three-point shooting team, which is true to a degree, but this team also shoots 58% inside the arc. So what does that mean, Cade? That means when the threes aren't falling, they revert to taking smart shots inside the three-point line. And when you've got that, plus the much better defense compared to Illinois, I think this BYU team makes the run. I think they get past the Illini and have that date sit up there with the other team we'll talk about here in just a second, coming out of that Washington State-Iowa State matchup.
Well, there we go. So, once again, I thought we'd have probably the most disagreement in this bracket.
Oh, there's going to be more.
And there's probably going to be a lot more.
I promise you, there's going to be
There probably will be a lot more.
I was disgusted about 5 times filling out this bracket. So, you'll see it. I didn't change anything. This is first run, sticking to it, gung-so. I used to be a guy that filled out 5 brackets. No more. We get 1, and that's it.
See, that's another difference, too. You're a 1-bracket guy. I'm a let's do 50 if we want to, try to game
When
the
I
system.
was your age, I did that, too. I could bust out when I was your age because now I'm, pushing older. But
the old age of what? Still not even 30?
Close. We're getting ready to knock on the wall. But, yeah, no, I feel you. I was the same way. But you just, over the years, you say, you know what? By God, my gut's either right or wrong. I don't care how many brackets we're filling out.
Well, there you go. So we'll look at the 2-7, 2-10, however you want to determine, whoever you trust in this situation. Iowa State, in my opinion, they'll play Drake. That'll be a fun game for Drake, but unfortunately, Iowa State, you talk about a well-rounded team, the defense they have, they're too much.
Yeah, and I think we're, again, in agreement here because for me, it would be Washington State. And if Washington State got any other draw, I feel like they'd have a crack legitimately at Sweet 16. They're going to give Iowa State a good game, but Iowa State's just too much. They're just too suffocating, and it's to a point where not a lot of teams can simulate that, much less experience it. And with the way that you're playing that on a quick turnaround in the round of 32, Washington State's got no chance, or Drake, because you would need a full week at least to prepare.
Yep. And you look at the 1-4 now, going back up to the top part of this as that top and bottom start to slowly continue to merge. UConn and Auburn.
Yeah, this is where it gets tough. This is quite honestly, like I said, this bracket, just boil it down to the roots of it for that bid to the Final Four. I think this is the biggest fight. And I could see, a UConn. I could see Auburn. I could see Iowa State coming out of this. Any one of those 3 teams, full belief they can make it. And it wouldn't surprise me if any of them do. When it comes to this matchup, I sat on this one for a while because I was like, man, analytically, both of these teams are where they need to be when you're profiling for a team that should be able to make the national title game and have a chance at it. Again, I think this is where the depth of Auburn flexes itself, because there's going to be that point where, folks, when I say Auburn's got depth, they've got two legitimate forwards, okay? Typically in March Madness, you want a strong guard. You think last year with Jordan Hawkins for UConn. Excellent. Had the great 1-2 punch with him and Sanago. But this Auburn team has about 5 guards they can legitimately trust, and Bruce Pearl kind of moves them around like Lego pieces. And when I say that, meaning at different points in the game, he can kind of shift the look and modify how things are, and it still runs smooth because he's got those guys really locked into their roles. So I think that type of look in a format that the NCAA tournament is tough to figure out. So give me Auburn, give me the depth over UConn. The Huskies come up a little sour.
I don't disagree with you on the depth of Auburn, and I think Auburn, if they were in any other one seed matchup, if you give them North Carolina, if you give them Purdue and even Houston, I'd take Auburn in that because of that depth they have, and they have the ability. If you can get a few fouls on Klingon early, this is the one key weakness of UConn. They foul more than a lot of people. But I think UConn just has that second gear they can go to, and that third gear, and maybe even a fourth that you don't really see from anyone else. Second half UConn is an absolute beauty of basketball to behold. I think Auburn will have the lead going into halftime. I think UConn gets to that fourth gear that no one else can get to. Auburn's depth can keep them in it, but I like UConn to hold on for
I don't blame you. I don't blame you. No ill will there, because like I said, I really believe any one of the UConn, Auburn, Iowa State could emerge from this, and I would not be shocked.
Yeah. Then we go to the insert your team of choice here versus Iowa State. I like Iowa State to beat Illinois. You know, if it was BYU, I'd still pick Iowa State.
Yeah,
that's not changing there.
Same.
Iowa State, this feels like the year for them, what Otzelberger's been able to build up there as a coach. You know, you mentioned the K-State comparison. I really think he could be the Bill Snyder of college basketball. You get a guy who loves Iowa State, really wants to be there and continue to build that program up. He's already done a great job so far. They can only go up from here.
And he's just got a great eye for talent, right? You hear a lot of these coaches now complain about, well, I don't have enough NIL money. Oh, I don't have this. He just takes it, and he's made it work. He's built it, and the school has been smart to allow some patience. That's the big thing, too, especially in college nowadays. I feel like we're starting to see people get impatient, similar to what we see in the pros, right? The pros, hey, if you're not winning, you're out of there, right? It doesn't matter if you were the worst team in the league. You built that roster, you're trash. Now with the fact that you've got NIL in the portal in college sports, there is more of that, okay, you know, you're bringing all these people in, we're spending this money, so if you don't perform, you've got a shorter rope. Whereas in the Iowa State situation, they know what resources they have, they play to that, they don't try to over-exaggerate anything to the potential players, and they find the right pieces. And that's how they've all of a sudden built this. And it just will be a team where you may see Iowa State kind of go, dare I say, on a stretch of, I wouldn't say dominance, because the Big 12, it's hard to be dominant, but they're going to be a legit contender now, probably for at least the next half decade every season, just because with the way college sports are going, they don't need to dig in hard to the NIL and things of that nature. So give me Iowa State to take on either Auburn or UConn.
And looking at that Elite Eight game, I mean, no matter how you slice it, you know, whether it be Auburn, Iowa State, or UConn, Iowa State, that's going to be a fight. I mean, that is going to be a legitimate, closest thing you could get to a brawl in the basketball court. That'll be an incredibly defensive, physical game. At the end of the day, it'll be the exact same thing I said about Auburn, though. I like Iowa State in 3 of the 4 matchups here, but I think UConn is just a slight smidge better. I like UConn going back to the Final Four.
And here's what's funny. I've got Auburn in the spot, obviously. I have Auburn beating Iowa State, so we're both agree it's Iowa State will lose. Just to who is the question. I think both UConn and Auburn, really, who comes out of that matchup to me has the inside track to say, okay, you know, we're the favorites in this whole thing, because that matchup has championship feel written all over it, and you're getting it in the Sweet 16. That is a pivotal matchup to how this tournament is going to go, I think, the rest of the way afterwards.
Absolutely. It will be fun, folks. That'll do it for this video. But, of course, feel free to Stick around. Check out the other videos on the channel. Feel free to like this one as well. Subscribe. Because we're going to get back into I promise. We will get back into content this time. We're not going to go away for 4 months again. I promise you we'll be back on Monday to recap some of the first round, second round, of course, the other bracket previews. If you want to see how the rest of our Final Four and championship predictions go, feel free to stick around for the rest of that. But until then, have a good one, everybody.